Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome back to the MindsetGo radio show, ICommunicate, a show where we talk about communication challenges in the workplace, at home, and in school. And I'm in one of my favorite places, back with one of my favorite people. Ted, great to see you.
Hey, brother. Good morning.
So, Ted, you know what we're going to talk about today?
Well, it's the afternoon. I'm sorry. Yeah.
We're going to talk about pressure, and we're going to talk about failure.
All right. Bring it on.
That's some uplifting topics to get
ready.
the day going, right?
I'm ready.
So, Ted, you know, I was thinking pressure, what's making me think about pressure is I'm thinking about what happened last night to the Los Angeles Dodgers.
Yeah, that's pressure, huh?
I mean, here's a team that was expected to win the World Series. I mean, certainly one of the top 2 or 3 favorites to do so. They've gotten the World Series the last few years and haven't been able to get it done. And it never ceases to amaze me how, and I don't want to make this about sports completely because this is life. How are some people able to perform under pressure, whether you're a public speaker, whether you're a presenter, whether you're a CEO, whether you're an athlete, I don't care. How are some people able to do it and some not? I mean, Ted, when's the last time you felt pressure?
Oh, you mean today?
If so.
Oh, well, a big part of my job here is full of pressure.
Okay.
You know, we joke about it, but we say, you know, it's like hours, days, weeks of boredom punctuated by seconds of terror. But it really is like that sometimes. You never know what's going to happen with live radio, so you've got to constantly be ready. And I think that's the answer to your question, is being prepared and willing to fall towards the explosions rather than run away.
Well, not only do I agree, I think you really touched on something important there, because being prepared, and I often speak about this when it comes to public speaking. So many people are afraid to be public speakers, but number one, the connotation of a public speaker is often that you're always going to be in front of this huge audience, which is not the case.
Never.
And number two, I think most of the time when we're in a situation where we have to execute or do something, whether it's public speaking or not, if you're not prepared, there's an incredible amount of anxiety and stress that can take place without preparation. So I think that's a great point. And what's interesting to me, Ted, is I look at, in the sports world, I look at a team like the Dodgers who failed to meet expectations again. And then I look at a much smaller scale. I look at the game that took place this week. I believe it was Sunday Night Football when the Colts played the Chiefs in Kansas City. Kansas City was a heavy favorite. No one expected the Colts to win, and they go into Kansas City and win. And what I draw from that is I find that often people are very successful when there's no expectations, when there's no pressure. So the Colts had nothing to lose. No one expected they would win anyway, so all the pressure and stress that you would normally feel goes out the window. They just function in their capacity as they normally would, and they win.
Well, being able to put the blinders on and do the job is probably number one in sports.
Putting the blinders on, and you know what, Ted? Here's the problem. I conceptually agree with you. But what's weird? It's almost we have to trick our minds, to not feel pressure. We have to like take our inner voice and go through this process to literally trick ourselves. Correct?
I would say that would be true if you're under the age of 45.
Okay.
If you reach middle age and you're not willing to say, okay, this is another tricky day, then you're going to have some other issues in your life about coping. So pressure is part of our lives, and stress resulting from that pressure is the indicator that you need to do something.
Well, and I had an executive say to me the other day that when he, quote unquote, put the blinders on and he has to trick himself, he feels like it's almost cheating because it doesn't feel authentic and it doesn't feel genuine. Mm-hmm. Which I understand. But at the end of the day, there is this thing, when we look at life, sometimes it doesn't have to be pretty. Sometimes you have to talk yourself off the ledge, or you have to walk yourself through stuff to get through it, get by it, overcome it. Those are good things.
This is one of the reasons why sports analogies to life have a limit. In sports, you have a performance component, you've got a team component, and you got to win because you either win or you lose.
Well,
In life, it isn't always a win or lose situation. There's a component of stress, but that's controlled by your willingness to face the moment and to dive in.
well, and I think one thing, I'm reading Bill Belichick's book right now, and one thing I've constantly heard from his players and coaches that have played when I've heard interviews and such is this do your job mantra, right?
Right.
Don't do anything more. Don't try to be bigger than you actually are. And that whole do your job thing to me is about staying calm under pressure.
There you go.
You know? And so what's interesting to me, though, about pressure is I like what you said about performance, but what I see that causes more pressure than anything else are the natural answer for those listeners out there might be the expectations others have of you, and expectations you have of yourself. But what I see, Ted, is often the expectations others have of you are perceived and not real. Mm-hmm. And that's the problem, because if you go into a situation thinking, well, I'm going to disappoint this person, I'm going to let this person down, I'm going to fail their expectations, that might not be actually what they're thinking.
Well, you shouldn't be playing poker either, because that's a clear tell. When you go into a game, and again, I think there's a limit to the sports analogy, but when you go into any kind of human game where there is this component of competition, there is going to be people who will use whatever they can to compromise your posture. Whether it's, hey, your sister was over at my house last night, or it's, I really don't like the color of your shoelaces. Why do you dress that way? Okay, and that goes on in the office. It certainly goes on in high school and middle school. But allowing them to get under your skin is, in a sense, giving them control.
Well, and I feel like, as we talk about pressure during the show today, there's that expression we hear of called choking.
Oh yeah.
And one of the real diabolical side effects of pressure is once you've set a pattern or precedent that you're a quote unquote choker, it is so hard to shake it.
There's no.
And then talk about pressure, because now you already had the pressure, but now you and everybody else is expecting you to fail because you've done it before.
Right.
So that additional level of choking, and I think when we break this down a little bit, when you talk about pressure, I think part of the way I overcome pressure, because I feel a lot of pressure as a business owner, I feel a lot of pressure when people pay me money to help solve their problems and make them feel more confident and develop skills. But part of the way I do it is to understand two things. One is, what is a template I have for success? And does that template for success have any room for holes? In other words, could I be generally successful but fail at a few pieces along the way? And I think the whole thing about pressure is it's setting an expectation.
There it is.
Setting an expectation that either for that moment or permanently that really isn't attainable.
Right. Having a plan, setting goals, defining the terms, and sharing the expectation with the receiver of the benefit of your work.
So, Ted, here's an experience I just had this week or last week. And I was asked to do a parenting workshop at a high school. They were doing an assembly for parent night or something, the normal assembly. So they asked me to do a parenting workshop on, the workshop they picked was called Selling Yourself Short, but it's spelled CELLING, and it's about cell phones and so on and so forth. So one of the things I do when I do a workshop is I try to perceive and anticipate what the expectations are of the people in attendance. What are they expecting to hear? What are they assuming they're going to hear?
Right.
And I try to structure the workshop really sometimes on the opposite, because if they're expecting and assuming something, I don't want to deliver that, because if they have that mindset, in many cases they've heard it all before. So when we come back from our first break, I'm going to share the failure I had, what I learned, and how it, even at 47 years old, has reshaped a process that I have to be successful and deal with pressure. This is Mark Altman for the Mindset Go radio show. We'll be right back. Okay, welcome back to the Mindset Go radio show. Calling in if you'd like to call in and talk about pressure and how you deal with pressure and cope with failure. Phone number is 508-871-7000.
What's that number?
508-871-7000.
Wonderful.
So I love when you let me do my radio voice, Ted. It gets me so excited. So here's the situation. So I'm doing this workshop, Selling Yourself Short, on how parents and kids deal with cell phones. And, I go into the workshop. I've heard people speak about this before, and so much of it is on the damage cell phones can do and setting boundaries and all these standard things we hear all the time in the news. And I'm not going there. I'm not going there. We already know all that stuff. So I go into the workshop and I decide this is going to be about opening up channels of communication on how parents and kids can talk about this push and pull and tug of war about when you can and boundaries and all these stuff. Yeah. So we're really talking, Ted, about these strategies. And so I finished the workshop, just didn't feel good. Nothing bad happened in the workshop per se, but just didn't feel good. I'm with a gym full of probably 100, 150 people. And I see the principal after, and I say to him, let's debrief next week and let's hear the feedback. So anyway, contact him the following week, and I said, well, what'd you hear? He says, the feedback was pretty good. And so I said, now, Ted, I tell this to people all the time. One of my greatest skills is listening, and I really believe that skill has been harvested because I'm ADD. So I think I've overcompensated for so much of my life that I so hyper-focus and listen to people.
Sure.
So all I could hear him say is, it was pretty good. And I'm like, pretty good, huh? Good, yeah. So I look at him and I said, I got to be honest with you. I don't think that was my best. It just didn't feel crisp. It didn't feel like my normal level. And this is someone who I've done programs for before. And he looks at me, he goes, I got to be honest with you. I feel like we have a close enough relationship. I didn't either. And so to me, that made me feel good, not because I didn't do as good as I wanted, because I created a relationship where someone could feel comfortable telling that.
And affirmation to your own expectations.
That's right. And so I looked at him and I said, look, the bottom line is when I do any kind of program, as self-serving as this might sound, I want people to be like, that was awesome. I'm not looking for, that was pretty good, or yeah, that was good. And so my learning is I put a lot of pressure on myself that night to be different than what people expected and to be something else. And I realized that took me out of my normal rhythm and comfort zone.
Right.
So I didn't do my job. Right?
Well, wait a minute. Wait. I got to stop you because to a certain extent, you did your job, but you did it differently. You were outside your comfort zone and you knew it. And it was because of one thing and one thing only. The audience had heard it all before, were faced with something that you were presenting to them they did not want to hear about, and you did it anyway. So I would give you extra kudos for courage. I agree with you getting affirmation back from from previous customers saying, yeah, well, that wasn't quite where you've been before. But unless somebody confronts these things in front of the children and the parents, there will be no movement.
Well,
so you did the right thing. You may not like the result, but you don't have to like it for it to be a good thing.
Well, and thank you for that, Ted. And I'll tell you, I'll give you another example. I was talking to a colleague this morning, and I was talking about a situation in the workplace or at a school where, let's say, you have a coworker, and that coworker, you've asked that coworker, they can be on the same level, they don't report to you, they can be a peer in this case, and you've asked the coworker to do something. and you have your reasons, but you've asked the coworker to do something, and you've had the conversation a few times, and they're just not doing it.
Right.
They're not meeting your expectations. They're disappointing you. It doesn't feel like they care. Or they're listening to you. So many of us, when we get in a situation like that, have a mindset of, well, why bother? I've tried before. They're not going to change. They're not going to listen. So why bother?
Give it up.
And I said, imagine this situation. This is what I told the person. Imagine a scenario where you're dealing with a coworker, you're dealing with a fellow faculty member in a school, and you get to that point in the conversation where it's clear that the other person really isn't that invested in doing what you asked. And imagine saying to that person at this point something along the lines of, listen, I understand what I'm asking isn't all that important to you, and I respect that and understand that. But what I'm asking is actually really important to me. And it would mean a lot to me if you could actually see this through. Now think about that, Ted. Not it's important to the company, not it's important to the success of our team or our division or whatever. It's really important to me personally. And I said this to a person this morning. They're like, wow, I've never thought of doing something like that. And I said, well, yeah, because most people don't want to make themselves vulnerable, right? Because when you now say it's for me, and then that person doesn't deliver, now it really is an affront to your confidence and self-esteem and relationship skills.
It's hard to roll back.
Hard to roll back from that. But you're reframing a concept for someone, taking them out of what is potentially a very selfish behavior and a thought process that's just how they think, and you're making them think, all right, well, I do kind of like you. Yeah, all right, well, yeah, maybe I can do it for you.
I feel like you're setting me up. This is my kind of thing.
Right?
I always respect the person who confronts the problem with a personal approach, because there's nothing else that works with some people unless you show them that you have respect for them and that's why you're asking for them to do this because it's important to you. They're never going to. It's never going to change.
Well, you say that, and you made me think of something funny. So you said you like confronting the problem with the personal approach, and I remember a few shows back we were going back and forth about the word confrontation.
Yeah.
But what I'm thinking about right now, Ted, is can you imagine? Let's say you were interviewing me to hire me as an executive for your company.
Okay.
And we're on the job interview. We're talking, and you say, Mark, tell me a little bit about your leadership or communication style. And this is how I answered it. And I said, well, yeah. I said, yeah, I'm pretty confrontational. And I stopped, right? Just to let the person on the other side go, well, what do you mean you're confrontational? And then I would say, well, here's the way I look at relationships with people. I think it's important to confront people with a personal approach, to confront people with emotional intelligence, to be assertive and deal with things straight up, face to face, but with respect and kindness and all the things that go with it. I just think if you're interviewing someone and you said something like that, person's going to be like, wow, where did you come from?
Mark, what you're saying is that's a hard sell.
Yeah.
Okay, and I guess I should have prefaced what I said on the previous show and today, that I'm speaking about a situation that's progressed to stage 2 or 3, where you've asked them, you've provided them direction. You may have sent the written memo with the instructions, and they're still not doing it. Now it's time to confront them personally, because there's nowhere else to
Agreed.
go. That's what I should have said.
So, and I agree, Ted. And think about this. We've been talking this morning or this afternoon about pressure, and think about this. Talk about a subconscious or an unspoken pressure. I don't care whether you're a parent, you're a sibling, you're in school, you're a boss, whatever. If you make yourself vulnerable with that personalized approach, there is an intense amount of unspoken pressure there. Because once you open Pandora's box and go down that road, if it doesn't work, and this is the thing that probably bothers me personally the most about how human beings beat themselves up. Once you open the door and once it closes in your face, the instinctive reaction in that moment is, I don't want to experience that again.
Right.
I don't want to deal with that pressure. I don't want to deal with that failure, as opposed to you don't make decisions on the right thing to do based on the outcome, right? But if you go, if you're attached to that outcome and you don't get it, you can't grow as a person.
That's the fight or flight thing I was referring to. If you do not walk, when the door closes in your face, if you do not walk back through that door and confront whatever it was, then it is over. You might as well move on and find, in this case, somewhere else to work or somewhere else to apply.
So listeners, let me make an analogy for you, okay? When you fail to meet expectations, what you perceive as failure, you don't rise to the occasion under pressure, whatever it is, okay? And then you tell yourself in that moment, I suck, or I can't believe I choked, or I didn't do what I need to do. And we all do this, right? So this is not abnormal by any stretch.
Human behavior.
Human behavior. Now, I think most human beings would not only tell you they do things like that, but they don't think it's abnormal. Yet, when I ask people if they believe and support positive self-talk, okay, when I say instead of saying something like that, you say, look, I tried. I did everything I normally do that works. It just didn't work this time, but I still know it's the right way and I'm a good person. Then I get a look of, come on. Why am I going to say that? Doesn't work.
Mark, one thing people don't understand in general, and maybe 1% of the population does, is that being assertive with your point of view is not ugly. Being tenacious because you believe in yourself is not just self-serving. It can serve the team. It can serve the world if you are the type of person who does not give up.
So I just have to digress for 1 minute, Ted, because you use the word tenacious. And before we go into our second break, I have to tell a brief story about one of my favorite people who is a personality here at the station, Douglas Rowan.
Yeah.
So Douglas Rowan's son used to play on baseball and basketball team as my son. And wonderful guy, wonderful wife. And so Douglas used to come to the games, these baseball games. I'm not making this up. He would stand behind the dugout, and I was one of the assistant coaches, and he kept yelling over and over, "Come on, guys, let's be tenacious out there." Yeah. And he kept using that word over and over.
That's the guy I was thinking of
right,
when I said that.
Right? Was it?
Yes.
And so I just turned to him one time, and I love you, man. I love that word. I love you.
He's the Lebanese lover.
Oh, my God. So when we come back from our break, what we're going to do, so this whole thing about it's okay to talk negatively to yourself, but positive self-talk doesn't work, and it's absurd, and so on and so forth. We're going to talk about growth mindset versus fixed mindset and how that plays into pressure and failure. And just know, if you don't think positive self-talk works, ask yourself, when you give yourself negative self-talk, ask how that impacts you. Because if negative self-talk impacts you, then positive self-talk can impact you. So this is Mark Altman for the MindsetGo radio show.
Wait a minute. Before you sign off, say that again. Positive self-talk.
So if understand the impact negative self-talk has on you, be honest with yourself and think of how you feel after you're mean to yourself, and then ask yourself how positive self-talk can have a positive effect if negative self-talk has a negative effect.
Like a shot in the arm.
Right? Makes no sense.
Build you right back up. All right. Thank you.
We'll be right back. All right, Ted. So here's the thing. Last year, about 15 months ago, I was visiting my daughter. She was studying abroad in Greece. And there was this thing in Greece. It was called a rage room. Have you ever heard of a rage room?
No.
Okay. It's unbelievable. You basically pay, we'll call it 20, 30 American dollars. You put on a helmet and some knee pads. You put on a little uniform or some kind, and you go in a room and they give you some kind of weapon, like a hammer or an axe.
A stick with two pontoons on the
yep.
end, yeah.
And they have all kinds of glass and stuff in there, and you can just beat the crap out of anything in the room and just rage. Like you can just destroy stuff, right? And it's so popular in Europe. They have them all over Europe.
Oh, my gosh.
So here's the scoop, right? So I'm thinking, boy, this would be a great business model. There's so many people could be like coping and stress relief at this rage room. And I don't know if you heard this, but I think it was Monday of this week, the Philadelphia Flyers hockey team announced that in the stadium, they will have a rage room for fans.
Wow.
And I'm thinking, what better sport? I'm a big hockey fan, by the way. But what better sport than hockey to let the fans have a rage room?
Jeez. You know that expression, what goes around comes around, what's old is new again? Back in the 70s, we used to fill my neighbor's garage with broken glass and then start the lawnmower and mow the glass. And it was just like this thing we did. The neighbor thought it was great because he was quite of a nut, and here we were, teenagers mowing the glass.
Unbelievable.
And now that I think about the liability issues and we weren't wearing masks or anything or a helmet, but that sounds like something that could be a real service to society.
Well, and the funny thing is what we have a program, Ted, at MindsetGo called Body, Mind, Bottom Line. And the idea behind this program is that most wellness programs focus on physical health, which is really important. But the mind leads to the body, right? So our wellness programs are focused around emotional and mental health. And I'm thinking, boy, we go into companies and do wellness programs and we offer coping strategies and stuff. And I'm thinking, boy, this rage room, maybe I better add it to my offering. I don't know.
I know that I talk about my mom and dad too much. And I've never said this on air. But, my mom used to say to me, because she'd see me getting really upset with my siblings, and I was the kind of person that held it all in till it was too late, and then I would lash out, she'd say. She used to give me a paper bag and a butcher knife and send me to the garage to stab the paper bag.
When you were upset?
Before I get upset.
Interesting.
Now, I would never do that with my children, not because I thought it through, and it's really not the kind of thing that modern society can assimilate. Sending a kid with a paper bag and a butcher knife to get his aggressions out. But it worked for me.
But conceptually,
it was a good thing.
Yeah,
because,
conceptually.
Yeah, and she didn't have a mom or a dad, and my dad didn't have a dad, so they were shooting from the hip. But that really did work for me.
Well, let me tell you something about that. So, to me, when you're dealing with anger, okay, one of the things that I always counsel people around is, when you're a parent and you say, don't look at me like that, or don't you dare say that to me, my thought process is you're actually stifling emotion in that moment.
Oh, yeah.
And what I actually have said to my kids is, not don't look at me like that, or don't say that to me, is, you have every right to be angry and express your feelings, but you can't do it in front of me. So you can't be disrespectful. You can't give me a dirty look. You can't give me a roll your eye. You can't say things you shouldn't. So go in your room, close the door, and call me every name in the book if that's what you need to do. And I see that. I see there's a difference in those two concepts.
Absolutely.
So, all right. Ted, let's get back. We could go on about rage rooms, I'm sure, the rest of the show. But
I want to hear more about that on a future show.
Definitely. Okay, so I want to pick up where we left off, and I want to give everybody a little bit of a unique spin on fixed and growth mindset. And for those of our listeners who don't understand the difference, you're not alone. Many don't understand the concept. So let me just briefly explain it. So a fixed mindset is when you evaluate your qualities, your characteristics, your skills, and you might say something like, someone says, do you want to go golfing? And you're like, oh my God, no, I'm terrible at golf. That's a fixed mindset. And the fixed mindset basically says you have made a decision. You have sentenced yourself to suck at something. And you're just accepting that's who you are and you're never going to get better at it. A growth mindset, as you might imagine, is the opposite. A growth mindset is, and this is the first hint, right, from a positive self-talk, from a how can you give yourself good messages to keep your confidence and self-esteem high, you would say, hey, do you want to play golf? And a growth mindset person would say, I'm not very good at it yet. Now think of all I did was add the word yet at the end. And whenever I explain that to people, they're like, yeah, whatever. Like that doesn't work. Just because I say the word yet at the end. But it does. And people, when it comes to positive self-talk, I think part of the message on negative self-talk versus positive self-talk is Negative self-talk you don't do once, you do it as a general pattern. So if the next time someone asks you something and you're like, okay, I'm going to take Mark's advice, I'm going to add that word yet at the end. Well, if you do it once and then you go back to normal and you do your own thing, no, it's not going to work, right?
No.
You have to have a pattern of consistency, of changing and reframing your mindset from fixed to growth. And one of the ways is to say yet at the end.
Now, short of sounding like Yoda,
Love Yoda.
sometimes the suffix doesn't serve as well as the prefix. Meaning, you can't say, yet I have to be good at golf, rather than saying, I'm going to be good at golf. Well, not yet. One sounds like sarcasm, and the person interpreting it will say, well, I don't know if he believes that. Whereas if I say, I haven't yet improved, but I would like to be better at golf.
Yeah.
That will leave an impression, not just on the receiver, but on yourself.
I agree, Ted. I think it's like when I was telling the story before about if you were in the interview and I spoke about confrontation that way, how you'd be so surprised. Same thing as what you just said there. I think if you put it as the prefix and use it, it's so much more powerful. I really agree. And look, so that's one thing. But here's something else that's way more powerful than even that. And here's what I want you to think about, listeners. So when you think about, forget about trying something or doing something. Think about when you have actually already done it and it hasn't worked out. You either haven't done it right, your own rules, someone's told you haven't done it right or well, and you feel like you want to give up. And you feel like you want to give up because either you're telling yourself you should or someone around you is telling yourself you should. And so if you're a person dealing with the person who's tending to gravitate towards a fixed mindset and give up, this is my thought process. The first thing I say to someone who does something like that is, I say, well, hang on a second. I don't try to convince them to change their mind, okay? I say, well, hang on a second. Has there been ever anything in your life that you tried and failed and then later tried again and were successful? Anything. You name it. Pick anything. Now, who's going to say no to that? No one experiences life and doesn't eventually start and fail at something and then eventually becomes at least one thing, Ted, right?
An ice cream cone. I mean, maybe the first time you got an ice cream cone, you dropped it in the parking
That's right.
lot.
And by the way, it could be as simple as that.
Right.
So, point is, when we are trying to help build people's confidence in the workplace, at school, at home, there's a tendency to go into what I call parent, teacher, boss speak mode, which is, oh no, you can do it. Or no, and you try to change their mind and
the girls call that patronizing.
Totally.
I think that's about men, but but I hear what you're saying. It's a tone of voice, and it's how it's sold or presented.
Well, but Ted, even if the tone of voice is great, even if the presentation of the you got this or it's okay, it'll be better, the problem is the other person has to come to the conclusion on their own why they're going to be successful and achieve this.
Absolutely right. They have to buy in.
And so when you say to them, instead of saying, oh, no, you can do this, or you should be willing to try again and try to give them the answer, if you say to them, well, let's think of some examples of some other times where you had that mindset, but you were rewarded and it ended up working out. That is so powerful. And I have...
That's brilliant, Mark.
Ted,
if we could bottle that and dole it out in high school, and kids could get into the workplace with that point of view, the world would be a totally different place.
I mean, and Ted, even just one final thought before we head into our last break. Even in the case of if you're a parent and you have a child at home that says, I can't remember my chores. Well, things that you want to remember, how do you find a way to remember those? Instead of, well, you need to, or you're going to be punished without.
Right.
Same concept. So
yeah, I hear that.
So when we come back for our last segment, we're gonna finish some final thoughts on dealing with pressure and teasing our show next week as we continue to talk about pressure and failure. So this is Mark Altman for the Mindset Go radio show. We'll be right back. Welcome back to the Mindset Go radio show. Mindset Go is all about building relationships and improving your communication through emotional, conversational, and multi-generational intelligence. And Ted, I have to tell you, I always have a comment about that commercial when we come back. And true story, I was at a school last week who had a bin of batteries in the hallway where they were collecting old batteries, right?
Yeah.
So there was someone standing by the bin who was like overseeing it or whatever. And I said, I got to tell you, I walked right up, I swear to God, I got to tell you, I am so proud of you for not putting mercury in the trash. I'm like, that's good stuff. So look, it's happening. That commercial's having an impact.
Oh, the Wheelabrator Company and the Federal Superfund thanks them too.
I bet. So Ted, before we go on to our last segment, there was one other component of growth and fixed mindset I left out that's extremely important, and that is, what about the person who says, I'm not good at that because they don't care? Right? So, forget the yet, forget everything. I'm just not good at it because now here's how even this simple component you could reframe. Every time you tell yourself you're not good at something, it subconsciously affects your confidence, whether you care or not. So how about instead of I don't care, or not that you would say I don't care, but how about something like this? I'm not good at golf because I don't really enjoy the sport and I never really tried to become good at it. Like even that, it still accomplishes everything, but it doesn't.
Clarity.
It just doesn't send a bad message.
You're on to something that I pushed on my kids, and that's this. Every time, and you hear it everywhere you go, people say that the first thing out of their mouth is, I don't know. I don't know that. I don't know. And I always said to my kids, every time you say that, I want you to stop and realize you do know, you just don't like what you know. And you've got to open your knowledge filter, let it in, and work through it. Don't say, I don't know, and excuse yourself. Because that's what people do. They excuse themselves from dealing with something that's uncomfortable by saying, I don't know, let's move on. Agreed.
Good advice. So, Ted, we're going to talk about, in this final segment, we're going to talk about one of the primary causes of pressure, and that is anticipating judgment.
Dun, dun, dun.
Right? And so when I think of anticipating judgment, I hearken back. I actually just used the word hearken. I'm pretty excited about that.
That's a good word.
Yep. I hearken back to being in high school. And I hear high school kids say this today, but I'm sure you and I can both remember this kind of expression when kids will say, well, I don't care what they say about me. I don't care what they say.
I don't care.
Right? And the truth of the matter is the kids who say that actually probably care the most.
More so than the others.
More so than the others. And so when I think about anticipating judgment, and when you're putting a certain level of pressure on yourself to succeed, how do you discern between what your judgment of yourself is, what others' judgment, how much should you care about your own, how much should you care about theirs? It's a really tough question.
This is a very important point in modern society. Back when we were in high school and, you'd say, well, I could just kill that guy. That was, a colloquial expression. Now, if a kid just utters those words, they could very well be the target of an investigation in the school.
Yeah, well, that's a whole other topic. That's true. But Ted, to me, things are so simple. We make them so hard and they're so simple. And here's an example. You know how I overcome my performance anxiety and pressure when I do training? I simply, before the training starts, I say to my point person, I ask them two questions. I say, finish this sentence. You'll know I did a good job if, and then I'll say, and how will the audience answer this? If you were speaking for your audience, the audience will know. I just say, tell me what you expect. Tell me what you want. I don't want to have to guess. Right. And so by clarifying expectations, rather than me worry, I have to do this, thing, I just ask, what are the expectations? What do you have?
This is a form of self-hypnosis. I learned this from a friend of mine. There's a golfer out there. His name is Tiger Woods.
Mm-hmm.
And he says that when he gets ready to go near the ball, he enters a circle of excellence. And he cannot hear or perceive anything outside that circle. Now, until he enters that circle, he can have a conversation. He can be looking at the weather or whatever, and he'll take it all in. But once he's in the circle, everything else goes away.
Love it.
Apparently, it was something his dad taught him.
Well, and it's funny. I was watching a special on HBO called Mr. Russell's House about Bill Russell, and he actually talked about something similar, that when he prepared for a game, he actually got himself into a rage for the purpose where he could get in that circle and not hear the crowd, not hear anything, and just lock in. So that's brilliant. So, Ted, one of the things that's interesting about anticipating judgment is there are times when you have a boss or a mentor or a teacher who is teaching you how to be, or a coach, or teaching you how to be better at something. And so, see, to me, in those moments, that can be where the pressure is really high to perform because you want to live up to the expectations of your teacher. And so one of the things I find interesting is a lot of times when you're going through that process of coaching or learning or whatever, and you're worried about performing, you could simply ask your coach or boss, hey, we've been only working on this for a couple of weeks. Next time I go out and do this, what are you hoping happens? I mean, again, ask. And Ted, we've talked about this on the show before, and I will say this until I'm blue in the face. If you are a human being and you have a core value of learning and you like personal and professional development, then I'm going to tell you there's 2 skills that you should focus on. I don't care what you're thinking you need to focus on. There's 2 skills that should be on the very, very top of your list. One of them is how to ask good questions, and one of them is how to listen. And those are 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, those 2 skills.
Yeah.
And I just feel like if you know how to pull information out of others, if you know the right questions to ask, when to show empathy, when to be curious, how to understand body language, like all these things, that is what life's about. That's how you create relationships with people.
2 ears and 1 mouth. There's enough right there for everybody to understand. You got 2 ears and 1 mouth, so you should be listening twice as much as you are talking.
Well, and what's really important, listeners, as some final thoughts for today, when I talk about anticipating judgment, the one thing you have to ask yourself when anticipating judgment is ask yourself, isn't your own judgment of yourself heavy enough? Like, for all the pressure we put on ourselves and all the expectations and standards we want to meet for ourselves, do you really want to add expectations? More importantly, do you really want to add ambiguous expectations of others?
Marcus Aurelius.
Yeah.
If we can accept that we can control what is from within us and that we cannot control those things that are from out of us, we'll be much happier.
Now, I just want to tell you, I love that quote so much, and I haven't heard it in so long. And I wish we had cool names now, like Marcus Aurelius.
Yeah, that's a goodie.
That's such a good name. Julius Caesar. Like, where are all the great names? Yeah. So anyway, look, when we come back next week, here's what we're going to talk about. And because I want you as listeners to really focus and lock in on this on the next week. And I'm going to give you a quick 30 to 45 second background on where this is coming from. So there's these expressions, failure is good, fail, try again. We have all these cliches and words around failure. And you know what I think the biggest problem with failure is we don't define it. Because to me, if you're listening out there and you're thinking, oh, I failed at something, what does that actually even mean?
Right. And
so every time as professionals, as teachers, as coaches and mentors, we talk about learning from failure, I want to understand what that failure actually is first before I learn from it. Because too many times I think people call things failures that aren't actually failures. And I'll tell you, Ted, there's 2 things I ask, final thought for today, there's 2 things I ask schools to do. I make a special request to teachers. Number 1, strike the word failure from your vocabulary. Come up with a different way, making mistakes, whatever.
Expressing it, right.
Expressing different. But here's the biggest one. Take off the comment on a report card, he's not living up to his potential.
Oh, it's off.
I just want to cringe every time I say it because
Oh.
you know what? Who are you to tell me what my potential is?
Come on down here with the rest of us.
You're right. So with that said, thank you for joining us for another edition of the Mindset Go Radio Show. This is Mark Altman with my good friend Ted, doing a great job producing,
Thank you,
contributing,
Mark.
wearing multiple hats, and we'll look forward to seeing you next week. Have a wonderful afternoon.